Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel Simplified Basic Concepts. In this video, I'm going to discuss about span of control. Span of control, which is also known as span of management or management ratio, basically refers to the number of subordinates that can be effectively controlled by the superior. So, it refers to the number of subordinates under a superior that can be effectively controlled and managed by the superior. Now, this is a diagrammatic representation of span of control in an organization. So, we see here CEO is at the top level of management, and under the CEO there is two general manager. So, for the CEO the span of control is 2 because he is managing two subordinates under him. In the same way, the general manager manages two managers under him. So, for the general manager also the span of control is 2 because he too is managing two subordinates under him. And under the manager there are two employees each. So for the manager too, the span of control is number 2 because the manager is managing two subordinates who are the employees under him. Now this is span of control. The span of control is very important if it is not balanced because the manager will face a lot of problem. Now, by balancing span of control, we mean the right number of subordinates under a manager. Now, the right number of subordinates under a manager can be more or less. That depends and varies on a large number of factors. But what are the problems that will be faced if the span of control is not managed? The problems will be the manager will be overburdened with work. How will he be overburdened? Because if there are lesser number of subordinates under a manager, then the manager will have to do a more routine job because he will not be able to delegate the authority and responsibility of work to his subordinates because there are lesser number of subordinates under him. So the manager will be overburdened with the work. The second problem which the manager will face is difficulty in coordinating the activities of large number of people. Now, when a manager has to manage large number of subordinates under him, he will have difficulty in coordinating the activities of all the subordinates under him. Then the third is difficulty in controlling the subordinates under the managers. The fourth is there will be poor communication between superior and subordinates if the span of control is not balanced. Now here, if the span of control is not balanced means the number of employees under the manager is not as per the characteristics of the managers. So what will happen? He will not be able to manage whether it is lesser or more. So there will be very poor communication between the superior and subordinates. And the final one is there will be very poor discipline in the organization if the manager will not be able to manage the number of subordinates under him. That is, if the span of control is not balanced. Right? So these are the problems basically the organization and the manager will face if the span of control is not balanced. So first let's go into details that what are the types of span of control. So there are two types of span of control. One is narrow span of control. The other one is wide span of control. In narrow span of control, there are very few employees that report to the managers. So here the managers supervise or manages a lesser number of subordinates under him. So the manager therefore exercise a very tight control over the subordinates. Right? Now, this we can understand with the help of an example of a classroom. Now, in a classroom, if there is one teacher for 5 students only, so what will happen? The one teacher will be able to keep an eye on all the 5 students at a time because only 5 students are very lesser number. Right? So in the same way, if in an organization, a manager has to supervise lesser number of subordinates, he too, that is the manager too, will be able to supervise those subordinates very nicely and he will exercise a tight control over them. By exercising tight control, we mean that the manager will be able to keep a close check on the activities and works of the subordinates. Right? Now, when there is narrow span of control in the organization, this will create a large number of levels in the organization. By large number of levels, we mean that the hierarchical level will be more. So this is a tall structure which results from the narrow span of control. So we see here 5 hierarchical levels, that is board of directors, senior manager, middle managers, junior managers and workers. And this tall structure is the result of narrow span of control because under one superior there is lesser number of subordinates. This is diagrammatic representation of narrow span of control, which shows many managerial levels and the hierarchies of the organization. So we see here that under one superior there are 2 subordinates each, right? And this gives a very triangular form, right? A very triangular form to the organizational structure. That is why it is called as narrow or tall organizational structure. So the merits of narrow span is the managers here can very closely supervise the activities of all subordinates because there are lesser number of subordinates under each manager, so it becomes very easy for the manager to supervise their activities. The second is there can be better communication among the superiors and subordinates because when there are lesser number of subordinates under a superior, it becomes very easy for them to communicate with each other. And third is it promotes personal relationship among superiors and subordinates. Now this is very simple because if the communication among superiors and subordinates is good, if the manager is very easily supervising the activities of subordinates, it's very obvious that there will be a close relationship between the superiors and subordinates, and that is very helpful for the organization. And the fourth one is control on subordinate can be tightened in narrow span. Control here means a close check on the activities or works of the supervisors, right? So a control on the subordinates' work can be tightened, that is, can be seen very strictly and closely by the managers in narrow span of control. Now the limitations of narrow span is it creates many levels in the organizational structure which complicates coordination among levels. Now we saw here that in narrow span of control there are many hierarchical levels. So here we see that in a narrow span of control it gives a tall structure because there are 5 hierarchical levels and this is the triangular shape which the organization gets when they follow narrow span of control. Now when there are many hierarchical levels, then it becomes very problematic for the lower management people to communicate with the higher management people due to the number of hierarchies. Second limitation is more managers are needed to supervise the subordinates. Now this increases the overhead expenditure, that is the salary for the managers, and thus it is a costly form of structure. Now let's understand this again with the help of a classroom example which I gave earlier. If in a class there is one teacher for 5 students and there are total 40 students, so there will be total 8 teachers required to keep a check on the total 40 students, right? So under one teacher there are 5 students, so there will be requirement of total 8 teachers to keep a check on the 40 students. So normally it happens that under one teacher there are 40 students, but when an organization follows narrow span of control, they will have to keep lesser number of subordinates, right? So what they are doing here, they will keep 8 teachers for 40 students. So more the number of teachers, more amount of salary to be paid. In the same way, in an organization there will be more the number of managers because under managers there are lesser number of subordinates. So to manage more subordinates, there will be requirement of more managers, right? So the overhead expenditure salary for the managers will increase in narrow span of control. Then third is increasing gap between the top managers and workers slows the communication process, right? Fourth is superiors have to perform routine jobs of supervising the subordinates and have less time for strategic matters. Now, as it is said that in narrow span of control, the managers can keep a close check on the subordinates by reviewing and performing their jobs. Now, when a manager will keep on reviewing and performing the routine jobs of the subordinate, he will have less time to spend on the strategic matter, right? So this is one of the limitation of narrow span of control. And the final one is employees here in narrow span of control work under very strict control and supervision of the superiors. So what is happening? The decision making is centralized here. That is, the decision making power is with the superiors. The subordinates here don't have much power to take the decisions, which restricts the employee's creativity and innovative abilities. Right? So these were few of the limitations of narrow span of control. Now, what few organizations do to overcome the limitation of the tall structure, many organizations reduce the number of levels in the hierarchy. That is, many organizations reduce the hierarchical levels of the organization structure. That is, they don't follow the narrow span of control. Now, how can they do this? They can do this by downsizing and restructuring. So these are just for information that downsizing and restructuring is a way in which the tall structure can be removed. That is, the organization can stop following a large number of hierarchy in the organizational structure. Now, next comes wide span of control. This is another type of span of control. Now, wide span of control refers to a structure with many employees reporting to a supervisor. So here, the superior or the manager has to supervise a large number of subordinates under him. So when a manager supervises a large number of subordinates under him, a flat organizational structure is created and the hierarchical levels are less here. So these are the difference between the narrow span of control and wide span of control. In wide span of control, the structure is flat. In narrow span of control, the structure is tall. And in wide span of control, there are very less hierarchical levels, and in narrow span of control, the hierarchical levels are more. Now, this is diagrammatic representation of wide span of control. So here we see at the top management there is CEO, and under CEO there are 5 managers, and under each manager there are 5 subordinates. So here the span of control is 5 because the CEO is managing 5 subordinates under him. The subordinates for CEO is the managers, and for the manager also the span of control is 5 because the manager has 5 subordinates under him. So we see the difference between the wide and narrow span of control here. Here there are only 3 hierarchical levels, and in narrow span of control we saw 5 hierarchical levels, right? Now the merits of wide span of control. The wide span of control is less costly as less number of managers are required to supervise the organizational activity, right? We saw that in narrow span of control, under one manager there were only 2 subordinates, but in wider span of control we see here under one manager there are 5 subordinates. So less number of managers will be required to supervise the organizational activity here, right? Then second is the decision making process is effective as superiors delegate authority to subordinates. So here what the managers are doing, they are delegating the responsibility and authority to their subordinates so that the subordinates can take decisions. So the decision making is decentralized here. Decentralized means the decision making power is not concentrated to the superiors only, but the subordinates too have the power to take decisions. Right? So when the subordinates can take decisions, the managers are relieved from doing the routine work, right? And the managers can concentrate more on strategic matter, which we saw was not possible for the managers where they were narrow span of control. Then third is subordinates perform the work efficiently since they are considered worthy of doing so by the superiors. Now when the superiors are getting the power to take decisions, they are given authority, they do their work more efficiently and effectively because they don't have a very strict and very forceful environment to work in. So the subordinates work very freely and do their work very nicely. Then the next merit of wide span of control is there is effective communication as the number of levels in the organizational hierarchy is less. Right? We saw that in wide span of control, the organizational hierarchy was only 3. Right? Under one manager, there were 5 subordinates. So it was very easy for the subordinate to directly respond or communicate with the manager because there were no hierarchical levels between them. And the final one is it promotes innovative abilities of the top management because the top management here can concentrate more on their innovative skills on the strategic part rather than focusing only on the routine matters and only supervising the subordinates. Okay. Then the limitations of wide span of control is superiors here cannot closely supervise the activities of employees. So here, now if again we go back to the same example of classroom, in narrow span of control the situation was there is one teacher for 5 students. right? And in wide span of control, the situation is there is one teacher for 40 students. So what will happen? When there is only one teacher for 40 students, that teacher will not be able to manage those 40 number of students as effectively and efficiently as one teacher will manage the 5 students. So same case happens in narrow and wide span of control. In narrow span of control, the manager can very effectively and efficiently keep a check on every activity of the subordinates. But in wide span of control, it becomes very tough and cumbersome for the superiors to keep a close check on activities of all the supervisor under him, because there are many supervisors and subordinates under a superior in wider span of control. Second is, the manager may find it difficult to coordinate the activities of subordinate. Now this again arises because there are more number of subordinates under a manager. Then the third is, the subordinates have to be trained so that the dilution of control does not affect organizational productivity. Now we saw in wider span of control, saw here that there is delegation of authority and decentralization of decision making. So here basically the subordinates have the power to take decisions, do the work. Now if the subordinates are not trained properly, they don't have those skills to take decisions, then they will automatically hamper the organizational productivity. So it is very important when an organization is exercising wide span of control and keeping one manager for many subordinates, then the subordinates need to be trained, skilled, so that they can do work on their own and they do not need much guidance and supervisions from the managers. And if this is not possible, then the subordinate will not be able to achieve their target properly, and automatically the organizational productivity will be hampered. Now, what should be the span of management or span of control in an organization? How can this be decided? Now, there are several factors based on which the span of control or span of management that to be used in an organization depends on. And these factors are competence of superior, competence here means capability of superior, capability of subordinates, nature of work, degree of decentralization, degree of planning, communication technique, system of control, and financial factors. So let's discuss this one by one. Now, each manager has different ability and capacity in respect of different skills. Like many managers have good leadership skills. They are very good at communication. They are very good at decision making and controlling their subordinates. So these skills, if they are good enough in a manager, then he can manage large number of subordinates under him. And if a manager lacks these skills, then it is better for an organization to place lesser number of subordinates under such manager. So this is one factor which determines the span of control. Right? Second is competence of subordinate or the capability of subordinate. If the subordinates are trained and experienced, then they won't need much supervision from the managers, right? Rather than the newer ones, that is the subordinates which are new and they are not trained, they would require a very close guidance and instruction from their superiors. So in an organization where there are trained and experienced subordinate, then they can exercise or plan for wider span of control, because one manager can easily manage many trained and experienced subordinates under him. But in an organization where there are new employees, they are not trained, they require strict guidance, then in such situation, the organization should go for narrow span of control, where under one manager there will be lesser number of employees whom the managers can keep a very close eye and keep a very close check on the work of those subordinates. Right? The third is nature of work. If the work is of routine and respective operations, the span of control can be wider. We know that if in an organization the work is of routine nature, a subordinate working on that will gain expertise, right? When he keeps on working on the same routine type of job, an employee gets an expertise in that type of work. So in that case, the subordinate doesn't require frequent guidance from the supervisor. So in this case, a single manager can manage a large number of subordinates under him. So if the work is of routine nature and the subordinate knows his work, he has expertise, then a larger or wider span of control is good in this situation. But if the work is not of routine type, right, then in such situation, the organization should go for narrow span of control. The fourth is degree of planning. Higher the degree of plans, particularly the standing plans, clearly providing rules, procedure, methods, etc. in doing the work, higher would be the degree of span of control. So, in an organization where the degree of planning is very high, where the rules, procedures, methods, everything is very clear, then the span of control can be wider over there, right? There, a single manager can manage a large number of subordinates. But in an organization where the degree of plan is not very high and the rules, procedures are not very clearly mentioned, then again in that case, that organization should opt for narrow span of control, where a single manager will see a lesser number of subordinates under him. Then next comes degree of decentralization. Now, decentralization of authority means delegation of authority. That is when a manager gives authority to his subordinate to do a work. Now, that broadens the span of management. So, when there is delegation of authority, that is the subordinate has the authority to do work and he can take decisions on his own, then in that case, the span of management can be broader. But in an organization where there is centralization of decision making, that is the major power to take decisions lies with the top management, then in that case again narrow span of management is beneficial, right? Because in that case the manager will have lesser number of employees under him and the manager will himself be taking all the decisions, so it will be easier for him to manage lesser number of employees under him, right? Next comes the communication technique. The pattern of communication may also affect the span of control. If the communication is face-to-face, it requires more time on the part of superiors and subordinates, whereas communication through use of modern communication tools like electronic devices will save a lot of time and span can be increased. So again we see here, if modern communication methods are being used, enhances the communication between the superior and subordinates. So in this case, one manager can manage a larger number of subordinates under him. If the pattern of communication is not very sound in an organization and they are not using modern way of communication, then it is better for a manager to opt for narrow span of control, because in narrow span of control there will be lesser number of subordinate under him, and even if the pattern of communication is not good enough, he will be in a better condition to manage lesser number of subordinates under him. Because see, if the communication technique is not good, if the communication is having problem, then the superior subordinate relationship will be hampered, and ultimately this will be affecting the organizational efficiency and productivity, right? Then next comes system of control. Effective system of control promotes decentralization, like we discussed earlier. The superior do not actively involved in the decision making process, as decisions are taken at the levels where they are required, because here the decision making power is delegated to the subordinates too. They have the power to take decision. So there is extensive delegation, authority, responsibility relationship in this system. Now, when this is being applicable, the span of control can be wide, right? So when the subordinates have the power to take decisions, the authority is being delegated, then the subordinates are taking decisions, the manager can free himself from routine job and can focus on the strategic part. So in this case, one manager can manage large number of subordinates under him. So in this case, the wider span of control will be beneficial for the organization. And the last one is financial factor. See, both wide and narrow span of control in an organization have financial constraints, right? A narrow span requires more managers, thus it is a costly form of structure like we discussed earlier, and a wider span may result in organizational inefficiencies, right? So proper balance has to be maintained between the cost and the benefits of the span that a manager can effectively supervise. So it becomes very important for an organization to understand that what is important for their organization. So based on the characteristics and on the points which I discussed, an organization can better decide whether they should go for a broader span of control or a narrow span of control, right? Now, till here we discussed that how can an organization decide that whether they should go for a broad span of control or narrow span of control. Now, whatever their organizations decide. Now, under a broader span of control or under a narrower span of control, what should be the number? Under a narrow span of control, the number should be 2 or 1 or 3, or under a broader span of control, the number of subordinates which a senior has to manage can be 6, 7 or 8. Who can decide that? So Graicunas gave a theory on span of management. Graicunas, who was a French management consultant, he introduced a theory on span of management. He said that there are 3 specific kind of superior-subordinate relationship in every organization. Now, this superior-subordinate relationship provides the information about how many number of subordinates a superior can manage, right? Till now, we were deciding upon what, that is, what should be the span of control, wider or narrower. But how many should be the number of subordinates? If broader span of control, then how many number of subordinates? If narrower span of control, then how many should be the number of subordinates? This how many number of subordinates under a superior based on mathematical calculation was given by Graicunas. So the 3 types of superior subordinate relationship which Graicunas spoke about was direct single relationship, direct group relationship and cross relationship. Now, direct single relationship means here the superior's immediate subordinates are equal to the number of subordinates supervised by him. So here in this example we can see that there is a supervisor A and under him there are 2 subordinates B and C. So there are 2 direct single relationship, right? The relationship of supervisor A with B and the second one is relationship of supervisor A with C. So if A supervises B and C, who are the subordinates, there are 2 direct single relationship, right? Now the second is direct group relationship. Now direct group relationship means those relationships of superiors and subordinates in the presence of other subordinates also. So here all the possible combination of superior subordinate relationship exists in group relationships. So the direct group relationship represents contact of the superior with 1 or more subordinates while other 2 assists in the relationship. So here if there is a manager who is X and he has 3 subordinates A, B and C. So there will be 9 direct group relationships which I have mentioned here. He has also given a formula to find out the direct group relationship which is mentioned here. So based on this formula, one will get 9 number of relationships if he has 3 subordinates under him. And the last one is cross relationship. Cross relationship is the mutual relationship among the subordinates who are working under the same supervisor. Right? So if under a manager there are 3 subordinates, so the mutual relationship of the 3 subordinates will give rise to the cross relationship. Now again for this also he has given a formula. Based on that directly we can find out the number of cross relationship which is n minus 1, and here n is the number of subordinates. So if there are 3 subordinates under superior, then there will be 6 such relationships. So as I discussed, if X is the manager and under him there are 3 subordinates A, B and C. So the cross relationship will be the relationship of A with B, B with A. Now here the relationship of A with B is different from the relationship of B with A. In the same way there will be 4 more relationships: A with C, relationship of C with A, B with C and C with B. Now these 3 relationships, direct single relationship, direct group relationship and cross relationship, when they are put in formula, they give the number of subordinates that can be effectively and efficiently be managed by the manager. So with this we come to the end of this topic. So do like and subscribe my channel which is Simplified Basic Concepts. Thank you.